He thought that if he understood her, she would love him more. But instead, she stopped respecting him. No one ever told him that could happen. All his life he heard the same advice. Be kind, listen, show that you care. He did exactly that. He listened, comforted, helped, supported. He tried to be the man every woman says she wants, gentle, patient, understanding. And at first it worked. She smiled more, she opened up, she said things like, "You're different, you really get me." But slowly something started to change. Her messages came later, her voice lost warmth, her eyes stopped lighting up when she saw him. He didn't change, he was still kind. But somehow that was the problem. When a man gives too much, when he becomes too careful, he loses something important, himself. He starts walking on eggshells, afraid to upset her, afraid to lose her. And women can feel that. They don't read your words, they read your energy. They can tell when your kindness is really fear. They can sense when you're not strong enough to say no. Understanding her didn't break him. Losing himself while doing it, that's what did. Being kind isn't wrong, but kindness without limits turns into weakness. She doesn't respect weakness, even if she says she wants a sensitive man. She wants someone who can care about her feelings, but who can also stand firm when things get hard. She wants a man who listens, not a man who obeys. He thought empathy meant doing everything to make her feel better. But every time he tried to fix her problems, he quietly told her that she couldn't handle them herself. And that made her feel smaller, not loved. Because deep down, women don't want someone who saves them. They want someone who makes them feel safe while they save themselves. They want to see strength when their world feels unstable. If you fall apart with her, she loses the ground under her feet. It's not that she stopped loving him overnight, she just stopped seeing him as the man she could lean on. And once that image fades, love starts to fade with it. He thought he was doing the right thing, listening, understanding, forgiving everything. But she didn't see kindness anymore. She saw a man who was afraid to stand his ground, a man who wanted to please her more than he wanted to be himself. That's the quiet tragedy of good men today. They believe empathy always helps, but empathy without strength only hurts. It turns connection into control, not because she's bad, but because nature works that way. If you stop leading, someone else will. If you stop standing firm, she'll stop standing with you. You think you're giving love, she feels you're giving yourself away. You think you're close, she feels trapped. And one day she'll say, "You're such a nice guy. You deserve better." But what she really means is, you stopped being the man I looked up to. Understanding her didn't ruin you. Letting that understanding erase who you are, that's what did. Empathy is good, but only when it stands on strength. Without that, it turns into something that slowly eats away respect, love, and desire. So before you try to understand her again, ask yourself this: do you still understand yourself? When a man tries too hard to be understanding, he often does it out of fear. Fear of losing her, fear of being seen as harsh, fear that if he shows his real feelings, she'll walk away. And that fear ruins everything. Because women don't react to words, they react to energy. You can say all the right things. I'm here for you. I understand. I care, but if underneath it you're anxious, uncertain, desperate to be accepted, she will feel it instantly. A man who understands everything stops being a man she can rely on. He becomes a mirror. He reflects her emotions, but gives no ground to stand on. And when that happens, she slowly loses respect. Not because she's cruel, but because deep down, a woman needs someone who's stronger than her emotions, not someone who drowns in them with her. When she's angry, upset, or falling apart, she doesn't want you to fall apart too. She wants to feel calm near you, like there's still solid ground under her feet. But when you're too focused on understanding, you stop being calm. You start being reactive. You move with her moods instead of holding your own, and even if she doesn't realize it logically, something deep inside her whispers, "I don't feel safe with him anymore." That's when things start to change. The man thinks he's doing everything right, but the woman feels that his calmness is gone. She no longer feels his quiet strength. Not physical power, but that inner steadiness that doesn't shake when life does. It's like a storm at sea. If the captain panics, the crew loses hope, no matter how kind or well-meaning he is. They need someone who stays steady when the waves hit. That's why a woman might say, "You're too nice." She doesn't mean you're bad, she means, "With you, I don't feel anchored." Most men never notice when this happens. They think being good is the same as being loved. But sometimes being good is just a way to avoid conflict. And avoiding conflict isn't strength, it's fear. A woman can appreciate kindness, but she only respects stability. If you always agree, not because you truly agree, but because you're afraid to upset her, you may win peace, but you lose respect. A man who always wants to be understood becomes predictable. Predictable becomes boring. Boring becomes safe, and safe becomes unattractive. It's not evil, it's just nature. Attraction needs a little mystery, a bit of tension, the feeling that there's still something to discover. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly. One small compromise at a time. At first, he gives in on small things. He avoids arguments, tells himself it's not worth it. Then he starts saying yes when he means no, smiling when he wants to speak up, apologizing for things he didn't do just to keep the peace. He tells himself it's maturity, that he's being calm, emotionally intelligent, the bigger person. But deep down, it's not maturity, it's fear. Fear of losing her, fear of conflict, fear of not being enough. And every time he gives up a piece of himself, something in her changes too. She doesn't say it, but she starts seeing him differently. Not as a leader, not as a rock, but as someone who follows her emotions instead of guiding his own. He doesn't notice it right away. At first, she just seems distant. She stops asking for advice. She starts making decisions without him. The conversations get shorter, colder, safer. It's like all the color fades from the relationship. He tries to fix it by being even nicer, by understanding even more. He buys flowers, plans dates, sends long texts explaining how much he cares. But now all that effort only makes things worse. Because she doesn't see love, she sees desperation. Desperation never attracts, it only pushes people away. Women don't fall in love with effort, they fall in love with energy, with presence, with the quiet confidence of a man who doesn't chase but also doesn't hide. When that confidence fades, when every decision becomes about keeping her happy, he stops being her man and becomes her shadow. And no one wants to fall in love with a shadow. The cruel part is that he's doing it for love. He truly believes that if he gives her everything, she'll finally feel safe enough to stay. But she doesn't stay, because she can't. You can't respect someone who doesn't respect himself. You can't feel safe with someone who's scared of losing you. The moment she realizes he needs her approval to feel whole, the balance breaks. Love turns into pity, and pity is the slow death of attraction. That's why she might say, "I need space." Not because she hates him, but because she can't breathe under the weight of his constant care. She needs to feel his strength again, his edges, his opinions, his boundaries. She needs to see that he can love her without losing himself in her. A man without boundaries will always be used, not because women are cruel, but because nature fills every space that's left open. If you don't set limits, someone will live inside your silence. If you don't say enough, the world will keep taking. Empathy is a gift, but without strength, it becomes an open door that anyone can walk through. And love, real love, doesn't survive in a house without doors. When she starts pulling away, he feels it immediately. Something deep inside tells him, "I'm losing her." And that feeling becomes his new obsession. He starts checking his phone more often, rereading old messages, wondering what changed. He tells himself he just needs to try harder. But that's exactly what kills the little respect that's left. He starts chasing. Not always with words, sometimes with silence, sometimes with overthinking, sometimes by trying to be perfect. He tells himself he's being patient, that he's giving her space. But it's not space. It's waiting. He waits for her to text first. He waits for her mood to change. He waits for her love to come back. He waits and disappears inside that waiting. She used to feel his presence. Now she feels only his absence, even when he's standing right in front of her. Because his whole energy now says, "Please come back." And nothing kills attraction faster than begging, even if it's silent, even if it's polite. When a man starts chasing, he loses his center. He forgets who he was before her. His hobbies fade, his focus fades, his ambition fades. All his thoughts circle around her. What she's doing, what she's thinking, who she's with. He doesn't realize it, but he's teaching her something dangerous. That his life now depends on her mood. And no woman wants to carry that. It's too heavy. Love can survive many things, but it can't survive pressure. When a man turns love into a project, when every word and every action becomes about getting her back, she doesn't feel loved, she feels trapped. It's not warmth anymore, it's weight. Every gesture, every "I miss you", every good morning text starts to feel like another rope tying her down. He calls it romance, she calls it exhaustion. He doesn't understand why she's cold now, why she rolls her eyes when he tries to explain himself, why his words, once comforting, now sound empty. It's because she doesn't need more words, she needs contrast. She needs to see the man she once respected, not the one who's asking for permission to exist. And the more he tries to prove himself, the smaller he looks. That's the hardest truth to accept. You can't convince someone to feel what they no longer feel. You can't explain your way back into love. You can't talk your way into respect. Because words can't rebuild what energy already destroyed. At first, he just wants to fix things. Then he wants to fix himself. And after that, he just wants the pain to stop. He tells himself he's fine. He says he's focusing on work, on the gym, on becoming better. But deep down, every action is still about her. Every change, every post, every improvement. It's all a quiet message that says, "Look, I'm still here. I'm still worth it." He doesn't see that he's still trapped in the same loop, still trying to earn what should have been mutual from the start. He becomes a ghost version of who he used to be, smiling when he's empty, talking when he doesn't care, agreeing just to avoid silence. And the worst part, he starts believing that this is what love is supposed to feel like. It's not. It's dependency dressed as devotion. It's anxiety pretending to be care. He checks her stories but doesn't message. He tells himself it's self-control. He scrolls through their old photos, telling himself it's just closure. But deep down, he's still waiting. Not for her message, but for validation. For proof that he mattered. That he wasn't a fool for feeling so deeply. And the sad truth is, he wasn't. He just gave love without balance. He gave understanding without limits. He gave empathy without strength. When you love someone more than you respect yourself, it always ends the same way. You lose both. She doesn't mean to hurt him. Most women don't leave out of cruelty. They leave because staying starts to feel like parenting. Because she's tired of being the strong one. Because he's stopped being her equal. So one day, without drama or tears, she just fades away. Not because she hates him, but because she can't feel him anymore. He's still there, but his energy is gone. His fire is gone. His mystery, his calmness, his edge, gone. He doesn't understand how it got this bad. He gave everything. He was kind, patient, loyal. But that's the trap. He gave everything, except himself. And when you give someone your entire self, there's nothing left for them to be curious about. Nothing left to respect. Nothing left to reach for. That's the collapse. Not the moment she leaves, but the moment he stops existing as his own man. When his world becomes a reflection of hers. When his worth depends on her validation. When his peace depends on her message. That's when he finally realizes he didn't lose her. He lost himself. She just followed. It doesn't happen overnight. There's no big movie moment, no lightning strike of wisdom. Just one day, he wakes up, and for the first time in a long time, he doesn't check his phone. He just sits there in silence and realizes how tired he is. Not just from her leaving, but from chasing something that never gave peace. He sees it clearly now. He wasn't fighting for love. He was fighting for proof. Proof that he mattered. Proof that being kind and loyal meant something. Proof that if he did everything right, someone would finally stay. And that's what hurts the most. Not that she left, but that he built his worth on someone else's approval. He remembers how he used to feel before all this. Before the constant explaining, before the anxiety, before the waiting. He used to have goals. He used to laugh without overthinking. He used to wake up with energy, not emptiness. And somewhere along the way, he traded all of that for the comfort of being needed. But being needed isn't the same as being respected, and being loved out of pity isn't love at all. He looks around and realizes how small his world became. Every song, every thought, every plan, somehow tied to her. It wasn't love anymore, it was a loop of memories that kept him afraid to move on. So he sits with the truth that he made her the center of his life because he was too afraid to be the center of his own. It's a quiet kind of pain, not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. Like carrying a backpack full of things that no longer belong to you, but inside that pain something shifts. Not anger, not bitterness, just clarity. He realizes he doesn't need closure from her, he needs honesty with himself. That's when he understands the real lesson: you can't build love on fear. You can't hold someone with your softness if that softness comes from insecurity. Love needs strength to survive, and strength isn't loud. It's calm, it's knowing that even if they leave, you'll still be whole. At first, rebuilding feels strange. He doesn't even know where to start. For so long, everything he did was connected to her. Now there's silence, and silence feels like loss. But slowly something changes. He starts doing small things again, not for anyone, not for approval, just for himself. A walk without checking his phone, music without hidden meaning, moments that belong to him alone. That's how healing really begins. Not with revenge, not with pretending he doesn't care, but with remembering what peace feels like. He stops asking, "What does she think?" and starts asking, "What do I want?" At first, he doesn't have an answer, but that's okay. Because rediscovering yourself isn't about having all the answers, it's about finally asking the right questions. He starts to notice how much energy he gave away, to overthinking, to chasing, to proving. And now that energy comes back to him, he doesn't rush to fill the space, he lets it stay empty for a while, because peace isn't silence, it's space without fear. There's a day when he sees her picture again. The same face that once broke him, but this time it doesn't hurt. It's not anger, not sadness, just understanding. She didn't destroy him, he simply outgrew the version of himself that needed her to feel whole. He smiles, not because he's over it, but because he's finally under control of himself. That's the moment he becomes attractive again. Not to her, not to anyone else, but to life itself. Because life respects those who respect themselves. He doesn't chase anymore, he walks, he doesn't over-explain, he says what he means and leaves it at that. He doesn't try to be the perfect man, he just tries to be a real one. And that's enough. He learns that strength isn't about being cold. It's about being steady. You can still care. You can still love. You just don't have to lose yourself to do it. People ask him if he still believes in love. He does. He just understands it differently now. Love isn't about fixing someone. It's about standing next to them without falling apart yourself. Because if love costs your peace, it's too expensive. He doesn't hate her. He doesn't blame himself. He simply thanks the experience for what it taught him. That empathy without strength becomes weakness, and that understanding others means nothing if you've forgotten how to understand yourself. He doesn't talk about her much anymore. Not because he forgot, but because she's no longer the center of his story. She's just the chapter that taught him the hardest truth, that love without respect will always end in pain. He understands now that relationships don't fall apart overnight. They fade when one person stops showing who they really are. And that's what he did. He tried so hard to be what she needed that he forgot what he needed. He thought love meant doing anything to make her happy. But now he knows real love needs balance. It needs space, honesty, and boundaries. Without that, kindness turns into pressure, and care becomes control. He remembers the way he used to say, "I just want her to understand me." Now he smiles, because he knows that even if she did, it wouldn't have changed anything. Understanding doesn't fix what imbalance breaks. Empathy isn't about losing yourself in someone's emotions. It's about feeling them without forgetting your own. It's standing close enough to care, but far enough to breathe. He's not bitter anymore. He doesn't say all women are the same. He doesn't close his heart and pretend he doesn't care. He just knows better now. He knows that being a man doesn't mean being cold, but it also doesn't mean being weak. He knows that the best kind of love doesn't make you smaller. It makes you stable. It doesn't demand that you give everything. It inspires you to stay whole. Sometimes he misses her, not the person, the feeling. The moments before everything became complicated. But he doesn't want that life back. Because now he understands what it cost, and peace, real peace, is worth more than being loved for the wrong reasons. If he could go back and talk to his old self, the one who was scared to lose her, the one who confused kindness with weakness, he wouldn't tell him to stop caring. He'd tell him to stop pleasing, to stop bending himself into shapes just to be accepted, to stop begging for peace that costs his pride. Because love built on fear will always turn into control, and control kills everything it touches. He'd tell him, you can be kind but still have boundaries. You can be soft but still have strength. You can care deeply and still walk away when respect is gone. He'd remind him that it's not cold to say no. It's healthy. That peace isn't about keeping everyone happy. It's about staying whole when they're not. He learned that real strength isn't loud. It doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't prove. It's quiet, calm, and steady, the kind of strength that doesn't shake just because someone else does. It's not about being the toughest man in the room. It's about being the man who doesn't lose himself trying to be loved. Now when someone asks him, what's the hardest thing you've ever learned about love? He answers simply, that love without respect isn't love, and that sometimes you lose people, but find yourself. He doesn't need to understand her anymore. He just needs to understand himself and protect the peace he worked so hard to rebuild. Because that's what real empathy is. Not losing yourself in someone's world, but learning how to stand strong in your own. And if you're listening to this right now and you feel like you've lost everything, remember this. You didn't lose her. You lost the version of yourself that thought love meant giving away your worth. And maybe that's not a loss at all. Maybe that's where you finally begin.